Thompson. On digitization at scale, automating the mass acquisition of digitized content. Who needs humans? It'll be automated. Go ahead, David.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Don. Excuse me, I put these on and you disappear. We learned a lot about the Wellcome Library yesterday. The poster session is still outside. You may choose to vote for that poster. I couldn't possibly comment. If you're not familiar with our digital collections, please do go to the website and take a look. We've done a great deal to make our digital collections available, and we're doing more all the time. We have a significant strategic driver to make our collections available, and this represents a change for the library. We have been digitizing for Wellcome Images for some time, for many, many years. The difference that we're facing now is one of scale. Our ambition has changed significantly, and we're talking about 50 million images in the next couple of years. A lot of images, a very compressed time frame. And one of the big challenges is how we change the way that we work in order to reach the scale of our ambition. We needed new systems. We needed to figure out how those systems work for us. We needed to figure out acquisition processes. In some cases, we even needed to figure out creation. We needed to figure out how and where we store this stuff, and then how we manage the volumes of data that we could see and anticipate passing through those systems. This slide comes from quite late in the project. I've lost the laser point. No, here it is. Here it is. The interesting thing is down this side here, the diversity of sources. We're getting digitized content from more than just people that are working in-house. There's a lot of different sources there. All of that content has to go down the same basic pipeline of process. And from later on in the project, we built this end to the process to handle some of that stuff. So it's a useful slide, but it spans the beginning and the end of the project. We were clear from the start that what we were going to do was reuse existing systems where possible. Our bibliographic system, Sierra, our digital object repository, Preservica, they were not going to go. They were going to stay and they were going to get reused. Looking at what services they provided for us gave us some clues about what was missing, what software we needed to bring that volume of content into the library. And we accepted that we were going to take a practical, iterative approach to this. We're not specialists, particularly in this field. We had an ambition. We needed to fulfill that ambition. It was going to be iterative learning from day one. We chose Gooby as a piece of middleware that would help us bring in that content, manage the processing of that content, putting it into our repository. And when I say Gooby, I mean that Gooby is an open source product. We chose to use the version of Gooby that is supported by Intranda. We don't have access to in-house development. We needed some help to get Gooby to the state at which we needed it. When we started looking for a piece of middleware, a lot of companies responded to our tender process and said, oh, we've got a bit of software that manufactures bricks. We could just adapt that. It's just a workflow. They're just steps in a workflow. Yeah, we said, okay. We liked Gooby because from the get-go, out of the box, it's dedicated to digitization. It offered us a huge amount of flexibility over our process control, and we have experience of using the tool, the SIP creator tool that comes with Preservica, which we use to put born digital content into our Preservica repository. We wanted more than that tool offered. Gooby is adaptable, scalable, and we knew that we could rely on the expertise of the vendors to help us out in bringing Gooby to the place where we wanted it to be. So Gooby sits kind of in the middle of the process. It's nothing to do with the creation of content. It's nothing to do with the long-term storage or preservation of content. It's about the management of that data as it moves into our organization, moves through our workflows. We have different projects, different project managers. We have staff across the library using Gooby for their particular projects. We've given them a centralized role in how they manage the data coming in. But for a couple of us, it's the reporting and the statistical analysis that makes Gooby really useful. We can pull out how many, how often, what happened here, how's that project doing, which all of our bosses need, apparently. We are actually working quite hard on a program that we casually call Eliminating the Humans. To the more senior managers in the library, it's about efficiency. Eliminating the humans sounds so much more interesting. We questioned our workflow. Every time we look at how we do something, we question, why does that person have to do 3 clicks to achieve that? Does that person even need to do that task? Can we automate that task completely? This is where the iteration comes in. The first ideas that we had about processing content were really good, but when we look back on them, what we see is that they were bloated, there were too many clicks, there was too much human involvement, and we could cut that right down. If we were doing that project again, that process again, we would go in very quickly, very deep, very little human involvement. But we have to put humans where humans work best. So for us, that means that there is a human mostly behind all of our METs creation, for instance. Unless there's metadata for that process, it's a human task. But we're trying to focus the human effort where it's best applied and leave the machines to do what it is that they do best, which is probably world domination. We've worked really hard on both system and process design, and we're clear. High volume does not necessarily mean using many systems. In fact, what is really required to get high volume to work is low levels of complexity, creating systems and processes that are as simple as possible. Now, simple is relative, and what is simple for us may be highly complex for other organizations. It's institutional specific. But alongside the automation, and the key purpose of the automation, is simplicity. Keep it simple, keep it understandable, keep it easy to manage. And if it's simple, it's going to be a lot easier to scale. It's going to be a lot more efficient. And those of us that sign the checks, hire staff, make big decisions, need to be able to understand what's going on. And a simple process is easy to understand, back up the chain within an organization, and to support buy-in, which is really important if I want to spend X amount of dollars on this development or that development. Partnership has also been really important in scaling up activity. We partner with the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive have a digitisation scanning centre based at the Wellcome Trust. I think it's the largest in Europe. It may actually be the largest in a wider geographic area. It's a long-term project with them to digitise our content. We're starting with the easy stuff, the 19th century, the earlier, out of copyright stuff that we can just push through their process. We harvest that content from their website, and we have a dedicated Gooby process that gives us 100% automation on the acquisition of that content from the Internet Archive. Although the IA upload the images as soon as they've shot them, it takes them about a month to create structural metadata for their processors. We delay harvesting until those have been created. We harvest 4 files from the Internet Archive: the JPEG 2000s, we harvest a MARC file, we harvest their structural metadata file, and we harvest a raw OCR file. Using Gooby, we can process all of that stuff 100% automatically, untouched by human hands, which largely accounts for the volume of material that we're able to process. If we had to have humans creating METs for all of this stuff, we'd be here. Well, it wouldn't be a job, it would be a career. So that's been a great success for us. We've had some challenges. Multi-volume works that we affectionately know as M&Ms. We've found a way, again, leveraging the expertise that we have access to in Tranda, in the vendors of Gooby, to bring together multi-volume works as a single item. I was at the Preservica user group meeting last week in Oxford, and there were some real challenges that other organisations were facing about how to bring a 3-volume work together and associate each volume with the other. We've cracked that, but we've cracked it in our own institution-specific way. Still done with a lot of human intervention, because again, a human can easily say, actually this isn't volume 2, this is volume 3, I need to switch the identifiers around. But every time we make a change to that workflow, it's a little bit more automation. Working with partners is excellent. I love working with partners. It can present its challenges. Changes to the Internet Archive website, which aren't announced, can break the harvesting process completely. And we can go from 0 to 0 in our boss's eyes in a matter of seconds. We have to create really detailed instructions for the third-party archives and libraries that we work with, and they need to follow those quite closely. We have an FTP process that integrates with Gooby, where FTP content is automatically picked up by Gooby and the process started. If the instructions aren't followed, that never happens. We're unashamed JPEG 2000 users, and creation of JPEG 2000 for some institutions is a challenge. The way we've got around that is a kind of 3 strikes and you're out. If you can't give us properly valid JPEG 2000s after a couple of goes, send us your TIFFs, and we have a TIFF workflow within Gooby that turns TIFFs into JPEG 2000s. It's a little more work for us. We try and get JPEG 2000s, but we have a backup plan. The biggest problem we're facing at the moment is the incorrect or inappropriate use of identifiers. We rely on other people to get their metadata right. Where they don't get it right, we can't automate processes. And again, it's something that a human can look at and say, yeah, of course I understand that, that's easy. But automating some of those steps can be really challenging and significantly difficult. There have been a huge amount of opportunities. We operate in a completely virtualized IT environment, and we've learned a huge amount about the allocation of server resources within a virtualized environment. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, and we've had some creative conversations with our IT people about the allocation of particularly RAM to particular servers sitting on a host. We have access to the expertise from our Gooby vendors, from Intranda, and Increasingly, we ask questions of them. We're thinking of doing this. How might you do that? Do you have any experience in working with this process or that set of material? Because we're working in a distributed system, because we have, if you remember, all of those sources of content, we've got a lot of feedback about our processes. There's a lot of people telling us how good our FTP is, mostly how bad our FTP is, but they're really worrying about that bit in the middle that nobody has got any control over. We're also a small team. On a day-to-day basis, there are just 2 of us working with Gooby and with Preservica. It's very easy to make decisions in a team that size. And success leads to success. One of the big things that we've taken a lot of effort to do is to shout about our success. And part of what I'm doing here is sharing our success and sharing our stories. We tweet about what we do. Our Preservica vendors tells us that we are the only organisation that tweets how many objects we have in Preservica. I would have thought it was obvious, but that kind of self-promotion really pays off if you're talking up the chain within your organisation, because the stories go around and eventually come home to roost in a positive way. In terms of lifecycle management, I think we're in a good place. We set specifications for the creation of JPEG 2000s. We give those to the third parties who are creating content for us. We expect them to follow those. And as part of our Gooby workflow, we run the JPEGalyzer as a validation process against those JPEG 2000s. And people do still send us files of 0 byte size or files that are not JP2 files, and we're able to pull those out and invoke our 3 strikes and you're out. The Gooby outputs, the METs, the structure, the OCR, the workflows that we use are consistent and predictable. Although we create projects on a fairly casual basis, we're pretty much using the same workflows again and again and again. So we have a high level of consistency over how our data has been created and managed once it hits our doorstep. Which means that we're creating a very unified data set to worry about in the future when JPEG 2000 needs to be turned into, pick a number. Has automation been successful? Well, yes, is the answer, with some qualified buts. Automation can be surprisingly complicated, and this is the conflict between your concept of simplicity is not my concept of simplicity. It sounds easy to run a process automatically against certain criteria. We need to keep thinking about the outliers. Well, what if they don't arrive like that? What if the identifiers are completely different? It's easy to make mistakes, and at the end of last year, I made one of those mistakes, and an automated process had to be completely rewritten because I got it wrong. And that's the downside of running an iterative process where we just make decisions in a small team. The more automation you want to do, the more metadata is required on which to build that automation. The machine needs to know stuff in order to do stuff with it. There's no automation without metadata. And humans are still required to manage and monitor those automated processes. Even though we're getting content in from the Internet Archive on a 24/7, 365 basis, we still need to have humans looking at that process, managing it, intervening where necessary. And it's that level of management control that Gooby gives us. It's the ability to be very granular about stopping this process, carrying on with that process, intervening here. This might not give very much of an idea of what's going on, but this is my workplace on a daily basis. Can you see the number there? we can have several thousand processes managed by Gooby awaiting collection from the Internet Archive. Huge number just sitting there working. Number of files awaiting auto-conversion. Again, Gooby is able to manage those files in the thousands. So clearly there is automation that is working. And overall, this is where we come to keep an eye on what we're doing and how well it's all happening. Overall, Gooby is part of a much wider workflow. So it doesn't stand alone as a process or an activity. It's part of an integrated whole. And that was really important to us because that speaks directly to efficiency. We've changed over time. This model evolves over time, but we're clear that in a loosely coupled system, one component is no more or less important than any other. We've talked about this. Complexity versus simplicity. Your complexity is not my simplicity, and vice versa. Iterative approaches do work, but they can be time-consuming. Mistakes can be made. Vendor support is absolutely critical. Lean on the experience that your vendors have and really look at process design. Really question, do you need that mouse click? Do you need those 3 mouse clicks? Do you actually need that human? And sometimes all we need to do is completely and utterly change the way in which we work in order to make a process better. Kia ora.
We can take one brief question. In that case, we'll move on to our next presenter.